Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry you've learned that we've had a technical issue, but we are good to go now. Let's just have a prayer to begin with. God of poets and prophets, God of paupers and priests, God who calls the ill-equipped and ill-prepared, God who calls the ordinary and the ornery, God who sends the stubborn and the strong, God who sends the shallow and the shameless, God who scatters love on rich and poor, old and young, wise and foolish. Call us once more in our extraordinarily ordinariness to walk in your ways, and then prepare us, send us, use us to sow seeds of love and hope extravagantly in your world, that we may walk alongside those who are most vulnerable. And we ask this for the sake of your love. Amen. I thought today that I would try and link with our main speaker somehow. And I thought if we were playing a word game where someone would call a word and someone else would say other words that comes to mind without thinking. Without a doubt, when we mention safeguarding, two words that I think would come up would be vulnerable and actually trauma. I'm sure someone would give those two words. And so I thought I would link the trauma, looking at trauma today, our main speaker, with regard in relation to science. But I'm not looking at science or anything like that. I'm using it in the sense of the social. And let me read very quickly the story of the man born blind. As he walked along, this is Jesus, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's work might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." What I find in this passage is the sense of the role the community plays in our vulnerabilities. And it's a key role. It's a key role. And it can be for good or for bad. It can be for healing and wholeness, or it can add to the trauma of where we are as an individual, etc. And so immediately within the silo of that community, there is a thing going that it must be somebody in your family that's done something bad. And now it's happening, you know, something has happened to you. I think we call it karma. I don't know. So there is all that milling around. And what is surprised is that the disciples, those who are meant to be walking with Jesus, would even buy into something like that. How easy and often it is that those of us within the church also buy into all the things that are out there on the edges. Is it his parents who had sinned why he is now blind? And then look at what happens when the man can now see. What do we find? We find that the people are not allowing him to be who he is now. So they're constantly pointing the finger. They're constantly saying, isn't that the master? And do we do that in our communities, our church communities, the communities in which we live? Isn't that the preventing us from inhabiting the space of healing and wholeness? He used to beg. How can he forget? No one forgets the traumatic experiences. As I was preparing this, I was thinking, how do we know what it feels like to be blind unless we are there? But actually, in thinking about it, I remembered as a child being beaten so badly that my eyes were closed. And it brought that back to me. So there is a sense in which, how do we enable those in our community to inhabit the space of healing and wholeness that they are now in, without pointing the fingers and sending them back to that place? What is interesting is that he owns it. He says, I am the man. And there is something to be said, to be able to say, I am. He could have easily hidden and said, no, that's not me. That's not me. But he owns it. And perhaps something in that owning of it individually enables the wholeness to be real. But I share this with you briefly, just simply to say that as a community, and I'm going to draw this to a close so we can move on. As a community, we need to enable each other positively to inhabit the space of healing and wholeness, and to let go of the things that are out there, and perhaps to walk with those who have had traumatic experiences in a way that helps them to inhabit who they are as the people of God, children of God, seeking to walk in the light. Thank you, Fiona.
Fiona, you're muted.
Well, that sounded wonderful to myself. I was just thanking Bishop Rose for her prayer and comments. And without further delay, I'm going to invite Maisie Atkins, who is the LADO for Medway. Maisie's advised me that unfortunately Ali Watling's not feeling very well this morning. So Maisie is as I mentioned before, she is the Medway local authority designated officer. I'm not going to steal her thunder and explain what that means, but I should have made you co-host now, Maisie, so you should be able to now share your slides, and I'll hand over to you now and myself.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Can everyone, excuse me, can everyone hear me okay?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And yeah, thank you, Rose. I'm feeling quite like, how do I slightly follow up on that? But a very good, some really good narratives to bring us to what is the local authority designated officer. So I'm going to share a very short presentation with you, and please feel free, excuse me, at the end to ask any questions, or I'm not sure how Zoom works because I usually use Teams. However, I can see there's a reactions button. So if anyone would like to ask questions as we go along, please do, because that makes it really interactive. And I think enhances everyone's learning. Sorry, Fiona.
Well, I was going to say, we've told them all because we've got like nearly 200 people, or yeah.
Ah.
So actually, we've asked them all not to do that, but to pop their questions in the chat. And then I've got myself, Paul and Katie and Greg, who will keep an eye on the chat, and we'll bring the questions to you at the end. Is that all right? Sorry about that.
Fiona, please don't apologise. That's amazing. Yeah, 200 people would make it very interactive. So thank you. That sounds very sensible and organised. So I bring the chaos. So, okay, my name's Maisie Adkins and I'm a social worker, and I've been a social worker for about 25 years now. And I came into the world of the Lado about 8 years ago. And I've worked as a Lado in Medway. During that time, I've mainly worked alongside Ali in Kent. So Alison Watland has her own Lado service in Kent, and together we've put together a short presentation to walk you through the role of the Lado. What do Lados do? In Medway, we're very well resourced. We've got a Lado manager, who's me, and we've got two Lados, Lucy Grieg and Sally Ann French. We've also got a Lado support services assistant. So we're very, very well resourced in Medway. And the reason for that is that within Medway, we have Cook and Wood, YOI. So that's a Young Offenders Institute. And going back a few years ago, Cook and Wood had capacity for about 189 boys, and they kept us very busy. We're down to about 89 boys now, but equally keep us very, very busy. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I'm sorry if you're going to see a little bit of the side of my face as we go through. So local authority designated officers, what are they and what do they do? And this was a presentation completed by Ali Watling and I earlier on in the week. So the role of the Lado, the legislative framework, was defined in Working Together 2010 and has been referenced in subsequent revisions. So one of the main legislative frameworks for child protection and safeguarding children is the Working Together guidance, and the Lado was set out in there in 2010 and referenced in subsequent revisions. Each local authority has a Lado or a Lado service. It's a statutory function within children's social care for safeguarding children. And the Lado, the main purpose of the Lado is to manage allegations against staff and volunteers within the children's workforce. And that can be paid staff, employed staff, voluntary staff. So it's to manage allegations against staff and volunteers within the children's workforce. That's the main role of the Lado. So where did the Lado come from? And we have this slide here, which is Thinking the Unthinkable. And following the Soham murders, there was the Bishard inquiry. And the role of the Lado was born out of the Bishard inquiry, because what that inquiry found was that a lot was known about Ian Huntley, an awful lot was known about Ian Huntley by various police forces around the country, various employers. And at that time, there weren't what used to be CRB checks, and we now know as DBS checks. And so Ian Huntley was able to move from position to position, working with children abusing and harming children. And then once somebody made an allegation, a child made an allegation, or somebody within perhaps the wider staff team raised a concern, he was able to move on to another position working with children, because none of the systems were joined up and there wasn't any trial. And that's what allowed Ian Huntley to be able to abuse children in positions of trust, and then when allegations were raised, move on to a new position of trust with children in another part of the country. The second person we have on the screen is Vanessa George. And I think Vanessa George was sentenced in 2009. And Vanessa George was responsible for, she was a nursery worker and she had been sexually abusing babies that she looked after at work, or she was tasked with looking after at work. She was filming the sexual abuse and sharing this with a paedophile ring. Those are two very good examples of the work of the Lado and thinking the unthinkable. There's some guidance from the NSPCC, and that value carries quite heavily throughout our work, and that many of us are in a mindset or of the position, it's not happening here. That doesn't happen here. That happens somewhere else. And the NSPCC did some very good research and some thinking around this, and published some research around organisations that said, that's certainly happening here. That's definitely happening here. Were those who had safer environments for children, those that were alive to the safeguarding concerns, those that were alive to what happens to children from people in positions of trust who deliberately seek to harm children. And that shift in it's not happening here to, oh, it's most certainly happening here, we've got responsibility to understand that, created far safer environments for children within organisations. And those organisations that also forged strong links with their local Lado service were also considered to be safer organisations for children. And so here we have the thinking the unthinkable. So from the Bishard inquiry, the role of the Lado was born. The role of CRB at the time, and now DBS checks, that's where they originated from. Okay, all right. The role of the Lado, what do we do day to day? So what does a Lado do day to day? The Lado provides advice and guidance. So we in Medway, and equally so in Ken, have a duty service, which is incredibly busy. Our busiest day this week was 39 calls on Thursday. So the Lados provide lots of safeguarding advice and guidance. And that could range from perhaps a head teacher ringing up and saying, I've got some pretty low level concerns about this member of staff. There's been a bit of a pattern of behaviour that I'm a little bit concerned about. There's no evidence that this person's harmed a child. What should I do next? And the Lado would provide that advice and guidance. We absolutely place children at the very centre of everything we do, and hearing from children is at the heart of what we do. And so every time we speak to somebody who says they have concerns, we need to understand that child's lived experience and hear their voice very clearly. What can be a bit of a challenge in our role is that we don't speak directly to children. We provide the advice and guidance to those who have got the relationship with the child and do speak to children. One of the values of the Lado service, one of the biggest values, is fairness and rights of the referred person, and how the referred person is going to be supported by their employer or the organisation that they work for. And we're very keen to ensure that those support plans are in place and those who have been referred to the Lado are supported properly, because it's an incredibly, incredibly stressful time. You've been alleged to have harmed a child, and that is incredibly difficult, and you are going to need a very good level of support. We are very keen to have allegations resolved in the most proportionate and timely way. And proportionate for the Lado means the burden of proof for the police is beyond all reasonable doubt. The burden of proof, or the evidential line for the Lado, is on the balance of probability. So our burden of proof probably sits below that of the police, which is very, very high, beyond all reasonable doubt. The Lado services work on the balance of probability, and that's our proportionality. We aim to resolve cases as timely as possible. We've got some national guidance around that, and the national guidance says that 80% of cases should be resolved within 1 month, 90% of cases should be resolved within 3 months, and exceptional cases should be resolved within 12 months. We liaise with the police. We do lots of work with the police, and we do lots of work with governing bodies like the TRA, which is the Teacher Regulation Authority, the DBS, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, just to name a few. So any person who works within the wider children's workforce falls into the Lado remit. So interestingly, we receive various referrals, and we received a referral about somebody who worked in a school to not disclose their identity in any which way, in a hospitality, essentially, in a school. And that person would be referred to the Lado because although they don't work in regulated activity, they work in a regulated setting, which therefore there's regulated activity, which is working directly with children, providing personal care to children, having unsupervised access to children. And there's regulated settings whereby the setting in which you work allows you access to children, and that could be unsupervised. So they're the two differences between regulated activity with children and regulated settings. So fundamentally, the role of the Lado is allegation management. We manage allegations against those who work in positions of trust with children. Also key to our role is the quality assurance, recording and auditing. So we're very keen to ensure that our thresholds are applied consistently. We're very keen to ensure that our oversight of investigations are timely and proportionate. Our outcomes are proportionate and balanced, and that we have an audit trail that demonstrates that. Every single Lado referral I have ever worked or ever managed or had oversight of, there is always wider learning for that setting, for the Lado service, for the setting, in terms of how do we mitigate that risk to minimise a similar incident happening in the future. So what needs to happen to safeguard the wider population of children? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? And we all put our best efforts into considering the wider learning and supporting those organisations to embed that wider learning within their setting. So I've talked a bit about allegations, I've talked a bit about thresholds. So what is the harm threshold within the world of the Lado? So we start at the beginning. An allegation may relate to a person who works with children who has, and this is the Lado threshold, behaved in a way that's harmed a child or may have harmed a child, possibly committed a criminal offence against a child or related to a child, behaved towards a child or children in a way that indicates they may pose a risk of harm to children. And in 2020, the Working Together guidance, which featured on our first slide, introduced a fourth harm threshold, which is behaved in a way that indicates they may not be suitable to work with children. This is the new fourth harm threshold. And what we see in the world of the Lado is employers and those in senior positions in voluntary agencies referring to us, saying this has happened in so-and-so's personal life and we need some advice and guidance. And what we would be looking at there is the transferable risk. So if something's happened in somebody's personal life, is there a transferable risk to the children that they work with? So also something we are seeing more and more of in the world of the Lado is referrals around the fourth threshold criteria, which is behaved in a way that indicates they may not be suitable to work with children. The majority of referrals that currently fall into that fourth harm threshold is those who have been arrested and charged for viewing images of child sexual abuse, downloading and distributing those images. Maybe there is a high level of domestic violence in a relationship, and therefore we would be worried about, within that person's role with children, how would they identify and refer to the appropriate agencies that safeguarding concern what is the level of transferable risk. So types of allegations: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, inappropriate conduct, external safeguarding, transference of risk. So they are the main types of allegations that are picked up by the Lado service. I mentioned earlier that Medway has the YRY, Cookham Wood, within its local authority, and the majority of referrals we receive from Cookham Wood are around physical abuse, because the referrals or the allegations that children raise often are born out of an incident whereby it's been necessary to use physical force or physically restrain a child. And often than not, those referrals come into us under the auspice of physical abuse, whereby a child has alleged that an adult in a position of trust, in this case a prison officer, has harmed them during that restraint process. So Lado outcomes. So if the harm threshold's met, then we will progress a Lado referral pathway. And within that pathway, there's a full investigative process completed, for example, say by the employer. Is there a case to answer within disciplinary processes? What needs to happen to mitigate or minimise the risk of harm to that child or the wider population of children? And when Lado threshold is met, there has to be a Lado outcome at the end of that investigative allegation management process. And these are our Lado outcomes. So we've got substantiated. So on the balance of probability, there is sufficient identifiable information / evidence to prove the allegation. So what we're saying is this did happen, and all substantiated Lado outcomes must be referred to the DBS. False: there is sufficient evidence to completely disprove the allegation. This didn't happen. Malicious: there's clear evidence to prove that there's been a deliberate act to deceive and the allegation has been entirely false. Unfounded: there is no evidence or proper basis which supports the allegation being made. An unfounded outcome may indicate that the person making the allegation misinterpreted the incident, or they might not have been aware of all the circumstance. And lastly, unsubstantiated, whereby this isn't the same as false, but there isn't really any evidence either way. It means that there's insufficient evidence to prove or disprove the allegation, and therefore the term does not imply guilt or innocence. Lado miss. And we've got quite a few of these, and these are quite exciting and interesting. And so we've often received many calls, and employers will say, right, so we've given you the allegation, when are you going to start your investigation? And we say, oh, no, we don't do that. You do that. LADOs do not investigate. We have the safeguarding lens, and we will cast the safeguarding lens over your investigation, but over to you, employer, to investigate, because you have your own investigation procedures, you have your own HR processes. So over to you to do that work. Please share the investigation with us, and we will apply that safeguarding lens and give you that safeguarding feedback. Also, LADO, what is your HR advice? Can I suspend this person? Can I dismiss this person? No, the LADO certainly doesn't have that teeth or power. Organisations have their own HR departments. Some buy in HR advice and the guidance and commission that service. However, the LADO will not be offering HR advice. We will not be telling you to suspend members of staff. We will help you understand what the risk is and how that risk could be managed whilst the investigation is being progressed, but we certainly can't give HR advice. We're not HR experts by any means. Okay, so what else do LADOs do? The allegation management is absolutely the central part of our role, but we also do other things. We respond to requests from Ofsted for information, and information requests, freedom of information requests. We respond to requests from the DBS. When a DBS referral is made, 9 times out of 10, the DBS will come back to us and say, we need some more information. Tell us about your process. Tell us about your evidence base. We escalate and challenge. The LADO role can be slightly frustrating. It's a niche role, and we often get slightly missed off the safeguarding process. And so LADOs spend a lot of time chasing up information from various organisations who say, oh, yes, I'm sorry, you were at that strategy discussion. And oh, yes, I agreed to give you this piece of information. Sometimes people don't give us the information. And after the 10th time, we need to escalate that and challenge. And there are occasions whereby a concern is referred in. That's very serious. And we go back to the employer or the organisation and they say, oh, no, we don't think that's very serious. That's happened before. We've managed it in this way. We were just kind of letting you know. And we may have to challenge that individuals or organisations thinking around safeguarding children and what the risk is. We do safeguarding and fostering checks. So perhaps if someone's applied to be a foster carer, that fostering agency will come to the LADO and ask whether this person has had any involvement with the LADO service. And we don't disclose information unless it's on a need-to-know basis. And contextual safeguarding, we help organisations think about contextual safeguarding. What does that mean? Because safeguarding children is often thought about, well, what risks are posed to that child within their family? We look at what risks are posed to that child within the community and those that come into contact to that child. And that's the contextual safeguarding role in the LADO, because we look at what are the risks in the community, what are the risks within that child's wider network of those that child comes into contact with. And that's the contextual safeguarding element of our role. So who are the Medway LADO service? Well, that's me. I'm the LADO and Education Safeguarding Manager. Lucy Greig is one of our LADOs. Sally Ann French is one of our LADOs. They're both qualified social workers. Kate Barry is our Education Safeguarding Officer, because quite a lot of the work with the LADO tips into the work of the Education Safeguarding Officer. So we work very closely with Kate. And Hannah Brassington is our LADO Support Services Assistant, and we couldn't do half of what we do without Hannah. So that's the Medway LADO service. And now we've got the Kent LADO service, and you've got faces to put to names with Ali's side. So along the top is the Kent County LADO service. You'll see it's double the capacity to Medway, because Kent is a very big county and they're a very busy service. So along the top, you've got your LADOs, Sarah Crane, Susanna Burden, Alexia Andrews, Alexia Hoska, Marie Jackson and Holly Priestley and Kuldeep Sahar. Along the bottom, you've got the contact and referral officers, who are Cameron, Lizanne and Bethany. And you've got the county Lado manager there, who's Ali, who's my equivalent in Kent. There we have it. Over to you for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Maisie. Sorry, trying to unmute myself very quickly there. I know I've been keeping an eye on the chat. There wasn't a huge amount there. I think Greg would want to just make mention of something to do with Bexley and Bromley. So let me just spotlight Greg in addition to yourself so that he can do that. There you go, Greg.
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, just to cover that, obviously our diocese has the challenge of working also with Bromley and Bexley local authorities. And so we have to work with the 4 Lados. Both Bromley and Bexley have their own Lado service, as you will see from what Maisie said, and thanks, Maisie. Maisie and I have met and we've spoken, and so we have a good relationship with all the Lados across the 4 local authorities. They all operate, as Maisie said, slightly differently because of capacity and geography. And as Maisie said, anyone can speak to the Lado, but what you should always do, just a reminder of the advice, is come to us first, because Maisie, one of the people would say is, have you spoken to your safeguarding leads first? But in that rare event that we're not available, and there was something, obviously you can always seek the advice from them, if you felt that the advice we were giving is incorrect. But they would always come back to us because they'd be saying, right, well, why aren't you doing that? Or challenge our advice. And we have had some interesting challenges with the Lado, and that's the way that safeguarding should work. It is that whole teamwork, and that we're up for the challenge. So thanks, Maisie, and it was a really interesting presentation, because I think it's often been a mystery to people. What is that, or who is that Lado? But now you know. So if you see Maisie, you know who she is. Thanks, Maisie. Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you so much, Greg. Just to follow on from what Greg was saying, I've been a social worker for nearly 18 years when I'd first heard about the role of the Lado. So please, in children's social care, and someone said the Lado, and I said, what do they do? 18 years later of working in children's social care. So yeah, that mystery, absolutely, Greg, absolutely. And thank you so much for providing forums and opportunities to be able to essentially spread the Lado word, because if a social worker of 18 years says, oh, who's the Lado? Then we really welcome these opportunities. Thank you.
I wonder if I could ask a couple of questions, if that's okay, maybe. You provided a couple of examples of that 4th area of risk. Somebody may not be suitable to work with children. I wondered if you could comment on things that, or maybe even the process. I mean, I agree. I would say to our those in the Canterbury Diocese, actually, please come through your diocesan safeguarding advisor. We've got really good links into the Kent Lado service. So please do come with us, and we would advise not to contact the Lado directly. But I suppose one of the challenges that we face at times is when there is behaviour that may not have a criminal record up against it. But how would you advise us working with the Lado in terms of assessing that risk? How would you, what kind of process? Because it's that softer thing that I think everybody gets a bit, and I get twitchy about, around, well, I've got some checks here and I'm not sure, and how do we evidence that this isn't quite the right role for somebody?
Fiona, absolutely brilliant question, because that is a really tricky area of the Lado safeguarding work. And I think you're certainly not on your own when you say that's something that I get a little bit twitchy about. And so say, for example, as you say, there's been no police process. So the police have perhaps looked at something and said, we're not going to take any further action because a crime hasn't been committed from our perspective, but we're still quite worried. Let me think of a case example, and that might put some context around that.
I could think of some, but I don't want to.
Okay, I'm going to give, yeah.
So if I leave.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I was thinking about, say, for example, there is somebody who runs a, who works within your organisation, who runs a small children's play group. And the children are aged 4 to 8. And that person who runs the small children's play group also has children between the ages of 4 and 8 at home. There's been a concern, there's been a referral into children's social care because one of the children have gone into school and says, when I irritate my mum, she smacks me with or uses a belt or an implement to smack me. The police and children's social care complete a Section 47 investigation, a child protection investigation. The police outcome is no further action because they've spoken to the child who's repeated the allegation and said, yes, when mummy's cross with me, she uses the belt or something, an implement within the kitchen perhaps, or the front room to hit me with, phone charger, for example. And however, the child didn't have any injuries. It was Child Protection Medical that said there is some injuries. They could be that they're historic. We're not going to put our neck on the line and say that essentially they were caused by a belt or a phone charger, but they might be. So we've got nothing really conclusive there. Children's social care go out and speak to children who again repeat their allegation and say to mum, oh, you know, please, you know, you can physically chastise your children. However, that's not illegal, but it is illegal to harm your child with an implement. Let's do some work around that. You, as the employer, have been made aware of this, and on Saturday afternoon, mum's coming in to run her group for children aged 4 to 8, and you've spoken to the Lado because you're concerned about what you should be doing as a setting, and the Lado has said to you in their infinite wisdom, we think you should do a transferable risk assessment. And you say, oh, great, I'll go and do that. And then call back 5 minutes later and say, how? What do I do? What does that mean? So, and that's often a process that people go, oh, great, I've got an answer, I've got something to do. And they run off and do it and go, what am I doing? So a transferable risk assessment is by we would be looking at, would have shared those circumstances from that person's family life. And we would say, what are the risks to the children this person works with? So we'd be looking at, first of all, the person we'd say to you, look, you need to sit down with this member of staff or this volunteer and say, the allegation's been made, the referral's gone into the Lado, we are now tasked with doing a transferable risk assessment. And whilst we do that, we may put additional safeguards in place, i.e. this person may have been running this group on their own. You may call on for some support for somebody else to support that group, another pair of eyes, supervision. You may have the opportunity to speak to that person whereby they say, look, yes, did hit my children with a belt or an implement. And I now know I should not be doing that. And I now know that that's about my anger. And when I get angry, I'm finding it difficult to regulate. So you might say, right, until you've got the help and support you need, maybe perhaps working with the same age group of children isn't for you. And review that as time goes on. Or you might have no concerns about transferable risk because this person works with someone else in their 4 to 8 year old group on a Saturday afternoon, never had any concerns. Children in that group are incredibly testing and press their buttons all the time. And they've always exercised completely appropriate behavioural management techniques and you've never had any concerns and children have never raised any concerns. You may have also had CCTV of that group. In that setting, there may be CCTV and you've done a random watch of Saturday afternoon sessions over the last 6 months you may have looked at for. Absolutely no concerns. And that would be your transferable risk assessment. So lots of strands to consider. And at any which point, come back to the Lado, seek that advice, and we can take you step by step through that process. Never, ever for a second feel you're on your own. And no question, many people ring up, head teachers all the time. Maisie, I've got a really silly question. You never have a silly question. Every question is incredibly important. And I don't know everything. You may ask me a question. I go, that's a really good question. I don't know that. Let's find this out together. So
that's brilliant. That's really helpful, Maisie. One of the queries that came up kind of as you were talking was if things were happening at home and at school, how would a church know about it? So having worked for the local authority as a social worker, I'll just comment and say that when if a child goes into school and says that in the course of an investigation or an inquiry being undertaken by social services, they will look at other roles that people undertake within the wider community, what jobs they do, etc., in order to kind of see if there's any other ripple impacts. And so I know I can speak for myself and for Paul and Greg and the other DSAs to say that we do get phone calls from the Lado service to say, oh, there's this ongoing inquiry and this individual has got this role within a church context. That does rely on the other professionals, including the Lado, in their information, which is what Maisie spoke to and alluded to. Paul or Katie, I don't know if there's any other queries that you wanted to address in the chat at all before we say thank you to Maisie for her presentation and for flying solo today and go into a coffee break.
There is a question about whether if the outcome to an allegation is false or dismissed, how long will it stay on the staff member's record?
Maisie, how long do the Lado service keep their records for if we make a referral?
Such a good question, and thank you so much. I'll work backwards. So Lado records are kept for up to 100 years. Unfounded and false Lado outcomes will not be shared. So if somebody applied for a role, say as a foster carer, and that fostering agency came to us and said, can you share your information? Unfounded and false allegations would not be shared. It's only substantiated Lado outcomes that must be reported on references and information checks. So allegations that are unfounded or false would essentially not be shared any further, but would essentially remain on file for up to 100 years. And you say, well, why would you do that? Because if it's, however, I had one case whereby I had 30 over the course of 12 years, unfounded and malicious. And when I came into role, I said, oh, this keeps happening. Should we take a look at this? So there was a bit of a pattern, and those stories can create patterns. And what in that case was, when we looked at it, was the employer was concealing evidence or perhaps shaping evidence to ensure that that outcome was false. And it's probably about time someone looked at that and said, oh, because it's very unusual for someone to be referred to the Lado service that many times.
I mean, I guess that relates back to your point at the beginning around Ian Huntley. And, you know, the role of the Lado service is in many ways to be able to gather the breadcrumb trail and to keep it in one place so that if there are, you know, continually allegations and things coming up, we know that your role isn't to investigate, and somebody made a comment that it feels a bit like you're the middleman all the time, but I think it is about holding it, correct me if I'm wrong, Maisie, but it is about holding that central information so that if somebody is moving from employer to employer or organisation to organisation, that actually somebody somewhere has got a record of that. Is that about right?
Janet, that's absolutely perfect. And if anyone wants to think of me as the safeguarding middleman, I'm more than happy with that, because that is exactly right. That is exactly spot on. And yeah, we hold that central information, and it's really important that LADOs work together as well. And we do that. And so often than not, we'll receive an email about somebody who seems to be doing the rounds a little bit. Who that LADO organisation has been very concerned about, maybe several substantiated LADO outcomes. However, they're quite keen to change their name or their appearance and present under the guise of somebody else. So Fiona, you're absolutely spot on. We hopefully have those central records, so we're able to track.
Great, thank you so much, Maisie. And I can't really clap on Zoom, but thank you. I know everybody will want to say thank you to you for your presentation.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this morning. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I've met Dr. David Shemmings before, and wow, you're in for a treat.
So I'm gonna remove your spotlight now, so you can relax and turn your camera off now. So for those of you who've just joined and joined us while we were in the midst, I do apologise if you had difficulty logging on this morning. We had a bit of a technical issue with our license, but that's now resolved. We are 1 minute behind schedule, so Greg, we're not off the hook. We're going to have to do our little thing. And so thank you to our presenters for altering and adjusting their times. We are going to take a quick 15-minute break. So the breakout rooms will kick you out when they're finished. Please use this opportunity. I will be doing so to go to the loo, grab a coffee, get to know people in your breakout room, but there is no, you don't have to. If you just want to take 5 minutes and or a few minutes and turn your camera off and have a break, feel free to do that as well. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms and we'll see you back shortly. I think that's everybody back, right? Okay, so said at the beginning of the day, Greg and I are going to just do a little update on Canterbury and Rochester and some kind of national safeguarding news for about 10 minutes, and then we'll be handing over to Professor Shemmings. So mine is the pleasure to remind everybody, well, I'm never sure who drew the short straw on this list, Greg. I looked at your list of things and thought I think I'm not sure which one I want to talk about more or least. But anyway, just to remind everybody that you should all church bodies need to be following the safer recruitment guidance available as an e-manual on the Church of England website. Within that is a confidential declaration form for roles that are eligible for an enhanced DBS check. So that would be any role of any church officer, whether that is voluntary or paid, that you are kind of recruiting to, where it involves a regulated activity, also part of the children's workforce, or they are regularly working with vulnerable adults and eligible for an enhanced DBS check. There are specific criteria. The easiest one to remember is anybody working regularly with under 18s. It gets a bit more fuzzy with the vulnerable adults, but there is a new confidential declaration form. So if you have printed off copies of the old one, please can you destroy those? If you save them on a computer as a template, please don't use those anymore. Go back onto the Church of England website. The form does look a bit more comprehensive and official, but actually, once you get into the nitty-gritty of it, it's quite straightforward to use. The thing to remember is that the role that you are asking for people to sign the confidential declaration form over must be eligible for an enhanced DBS check. If it's not, in fact, we're not entitled to that information under the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. And I don't want to get into the technicality of it. If you've got some technical questions, please contact Greg or myself and Paul or one of the other, Caroline or Ant in your area in order to clarify. If you're in doubt, please just get in touch with us. That's probably all I want to say on that, Greg. Over to you for the next.
I think you chose the subjects, Fiona, and you chose the most exciting. So for Rochester, we will be circulating the link because it is only linked through the available through the email. Sorry, the e-manual, not the mail. So my item is that, as you will know, hopefully. there was a national push on the 16 days of activism against violence for women and girls, which was in addition to Safeguarding Sunday. Thank you all for those who participate in Safeguarding Sunday. And for us, if you did participate, we would like to know, even if a quick yes or no, and Jenny Ross is just is going to do an email out to all the PSOs, because it is a good news story that we just want to be able to say, yeah, we're getting more people involved in Safeguarding Sunday. And if you haven't already got it in your diary for next year, this year, it's the 19th of November, 23. So as a consequence of the 16 days of activism, the National Safeguarding Team have recognised that we need to do more work on domestic abuse, which is one of the biggest issues that we will face, that is happening now, sadly, within our communities, often not underreported. So there is a new national working group looking at the whole issue of how the church responds to domestic abuse, and I'm involved in that working group. As many of you will know, I previously worked before coming to the diocese for a domestic abuse charity in Kenton Medway. Thanks, Fiona. Back to you.
Yeah, so the next thing, just to highlight, these are just highlights that there's no way we're going to be able to cover anything in any depth. So, but again, just to draw people's attention to the Responding Well to Survivors guidance, that places a duty on all church bodies to have a support person for any victims or survivors of abuse. There's some ongoing discussions around how we do that. In Canterbury, we are doing that on a case-by-case basis, but also linking in with other third sector support charities in the area, such as Youth Kent, Rape Crisis and Family Matters. So if you have any questions about how your church body can meet that requirement, please do get in touch with your DSA. And over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, and as Fiona says, although the national guidance is there, the actual implementation of it is still being rolled out, and the national team are working on that. A question that might be coming up to some of you is, we did the new leadership pathway training 3 years ago. Is it just going to be the same? We've been told by the national team that there is a new leadership pathway going to be published and be available by Easter, and it is the same format, but it will be different. So it will be 2 Zoom sessions, and there will be some work. So there isn't going to be a refresher course, but we'll be awaiting more details coming out from the national team, hopefully soon, so that we can start implementing it across our different dioceses. I know we all do it slightly differently. But again, if there's any questions about training, as always, come to the team or come to Sophie, who's on this call for Rochester, and obviously Katie for Canterbury. Thanks, Fiona. It's me again.
And then I'll finish off.
Okie dokie. So I'm going to combine this in 2 things I'm going to cover. Is we will be circulating shortly. There's a new guide for bell ringing and safeguarding from the Central Council. It'll be coming out on our next bulletin in Rochester. So look for that. You've recently had one bulletin which had quite a lot in, so another one will be coming out soon. And this is just a little reminder that we have our next network meeting for PSOs. Hopefully you've all received that. So it's on the 25th of January for Tunbridge Archdeaconry, the 30th for Rochester Archdeaconry of January, and the 7th of February for Bromley and Bexley. But of course, it's an open invite. If you can't come to your own Archdeaconry one, just come to any of them, all starting at 19:30. And we look forward to seeing you there for more detailed questions. And as always, we thank you, all you wonderful PSOs, for everything you do. We couldn't do this without you. Fiona.
Absolutely. So just final one for Canterbury, similar to Greg, just to say that our network, so we held our first networking event in November. I know many of you came, some weren't able to come. This is advance notice, and we will put it out in the briefing, and there will be an event, a booking link shortly. But the next one will be on I believe it's Thursday, the 9th of March. and it will be from 7 till 8:30 is the timings for it, and we'll send out some links. We'll just be all together, so for the Canterbury one, and there will be a spring newsletter coming out sometime around the March, April time as well.
For yet another excellent presentation. And so this is very exciting that we have the opportunity to hear from Bishop Jonathan, both in the capacity as obviously our diocesan bishop, but also as safeguarding lead for a little while longer. And of course, we're very excited that Bishop Joanne is going to be the new safeguarding lead. So we know that it'll be moving from one set of safe hands to another. Bishop Jonathan.
Greg, thank you very much indeed. I mean, the first thing I want to say is a huge thank you to everybody who's been involved in this morning's conference, to the organisers, and well done for overcoming the technical glitches at the beginning. But also to our speakers, really helpful to hear from Maisie, demystifying and explaining the work of LADO, the colleagues we work with in the statutory sector and who do so much to support and advise us. But in particular also to David for that wonderful presentation, full of insight, but also deeply moving. So I'm very grateful to share in that. I mean, if I'm honest, I think all of my fellow bishops would benefit from hearing that presentation as well, and I think we should find some way of incorporating you into our national training, David, because the understanding of trauma, to my mind, is probably one of the most significant areas for, because if we understand trauma, and you've given us so much insight today, it equips us not to understand process for how we should respond, but we begin to get it in our hearts and souls as to the complexity of what we're dealing with, and how we can most helpfully respond to those who have experienced trauma, as many of us on the call today, whether abuse or in other contexts, will have experienced. So I just want to echo what David said. If this has triggered issues for you, and it maybe brought things to the surface for you, do take the time to talk to someone to get the help and support that you need. But hugely grateful for those insights. Beyond that, also to say thank you to all of our colleagues in our 2 diocesan safeguarding teams. It's been my privilege to get to know Greg and colleagues here in Rochester over the last few months. I really value their support already, and I'm enormously grateful, both as diocesan bishop and as lead bishop for safeguarding, for the work that goes on in our diocesan and cathedral safeguarding teams. There's been a huge amount happening over the last few years, and you really have stepped up to the plate and are helping to lead the church forward in much needed change in terms of our culture. But the other thing I want to say really is thank you to all of you on the call today, those of you involved in parishes, whether that's clergy or lay people, parish safeguarding officers, others who are involved in this work, because you are the front line. You are the places and the people that perhaps pick up concerns in the first instance, but you're also the first line of that kind of compassionate listening, understanding response, which about the importance of which David has outlined so powerfully in his presentation today. It is a huge amount of work. I'm very conscious at times of the demands that places upon both clergy and lay people and PCCs and so on in terms of time and resource. But this is so important. This is about making the church a safe and healthy and nurturing place for all children, vulnerable adults. And it's part of the work of the kingdom of God, God's kingdom of justice and mercy and peace. So I do recognize the challenges involved, the huge amount of work involved, but my thanks to all of you for all that you are doing. Yes, it's been my privilege to be the lead bishop for safeguarding in the Church of England over the last nearly 3 years now, and that term of office comes to end at the end of March. My commitment, on the other hand, to the work of safeguarding will continue. I was involved in particular in family support work over many years, working with vulnerable families before I became a bishop. That commitment will continue, as some of you know, and I shared quite openly at the beginning of my term as office as lead bishop for safeguarding. Part of my sense of calling to this was about my own experience of childhood trauma, not sexual abuse, but and I think David has very helpfully indicated that trauma takes many forms, but its effects are lifelong. And everything that we can do to help the church to become a place where people can find listening and healing and compassion and the love and mercy of God, that this really is at the heart of the work of the gospel and the work of God's kingdom. So thank you to all of you. We had a really helpful reflection theologically and biblically and personally from Bishop Rose at the beginning. I'm not planning to mirror that in what I'm saying here, but rather what I would like to do and what I've been asked to do is to say some prayers at the end of our time together. So unless Greg and Fiona, there's anything more you would like me to do or say, that's what I'm planning to do now, is that we move to have just a half a minute of silence, and then I'll lead us in some prayers. Can I commend to you? Thank you so much, David, for the list of resources and people and resources that you mentioned. There are quite a lot of resources on the National Safeguarding pages of the Church of England website, picking up many of the books that you've mentioned. There's also now the Church of England has produced a set of resources and prayers under the heading of Towards a Safer Church. So I would commend that to all of you as a resource, and I'm going to be using some of those prayers in a moment. So last look to Greg and to Fiona. Is there anything more you would like me to say or do? But otherwise, I'm going to, in about half a minute, move to prayer.
Nothing further from you.
That's fine.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Some prayers of intercession and then a final prayer of blessing. Let's be still for a moment. And so we come before God at the end of this morning, full of rich insights, mindful of the impact of abuse and trauma on the lives of people we know and love, and indeed of ourselves. Seeking God's healing and compassion, and praying for the coming of his kingdom of righteousness and justice and peace. Loving God, we lay before you the challenges that confront us at home, at work, in our communities and churches. May your Son, the Good Shepherd, guide and shape the life of your church, that all may find a welcome, secure in your presence. Jesus, Lord of the church, in your mercy, hear our prayer. Renew your church in the love of truth and in passion for justice. Take from us all hypocrisy and deceit, and teach us to serve with humility and honesty those whose lives are broken. Jesus, Lord of the church, in your mercy, hear our prayer. Help us to cherish children and all in our community who are vulnerable, to protect them and keep them safe. May our churches rejoice to be places where your love is celebrated with integrity. Jesus, Lord of the church, in your mercy, hear our prayer. Bring into your healing presence all who have been damaged and diminished by abuse, or whose lives continue to be overshadowed by guilt or fear. May sorrows be shared, and memories and hearts be healed. Jesus, Lord of the Church, in your mercy, hear our prayer. May those who have been damaged by abuse not simply survive, but flourish. May young and old discover your life-giving love and delight in your gift of life, so that fun, laughter, and joy may overflow once more to your glory. Jesus, Lord of the Church, in your mercy, hear our prayer. And finally, a prayer for God's blessing. The God of love, passionate and strong, faithful and tender, watch over you and keep you safe all the days of your life. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Jonathan. Falls to me, I think, to say thank you all for coming to the conference today and for bearing with us at the beginning with all the technical hitches we had. I hope you've appreciated and really enjoyed, I know I have, all the information, the presentation from Maisie that was put together with Ali, and the presentation by Professor David Shemmings, just really insightful, really helpful in all the work that we do. And I just want to echo Bishop Jonathan's thanks for all of you. The fact that you're here means that in some ways you prioritise safeguarding, and we can only really ensure that our churches are safer places to be when everybody is putting safeguarding at the forefront. Along with all the work that we do and all the work that the church is called to do, but that safeguarding is running through the kind of the thread running through everything that we're doing, making sure that it is as safe as we can make it for people. So thank you very much for coming. And on the behalf of the team, I'm going to say thank you. And you've got an extra 20 minutes added into your day today. So thank you, everybody. Feel free to go as and when. I'll be ending the meeting shortly. Thank you.